Tonight on Talking Politics, Katie Lannon sat down with Massachusetts Secretary of Veteran Services John Santiago to talk about rebuilding trust in the agency and efforts to reform the Holyoke and Chelsea soldiers' homes after leadership failures contributed to deadly COVID outbreaks there. But first, immigration has always been a trigger point in the culture wars. But in this election cycle, tensions over migrants and the border are particularly high, and Massachusetts keeps getting dragged into the national debate. That's thanks in part to Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who's threatening to fly even more migrants here from his state, and to the recent alleged rape of a teenager at a migrant shelter in Rockland. That's adding fuel to the fire as well, especially for Governor Maura Healey, who's been getting a lot of pushback for her response to the alleged attacks. So what is at stake in this debate for local politicians and the migrants caught up in it all? Joining me are Boston Globe reporter Samantha Gross and El Mundo Boston president and CEO Alberto Vasallo III. Good to have you both here. Samantha, let me start with you. There are some changes afoot that will affect the way migrants coming to Massachusetts are housed and what they have to do to get emergency housing. The legislature seems poised to create a 9-month cap on the amount of time you can stay in the emergency assistance housing program, which right now includes 7,500 families, both migrants and non-migrants. And in addition, the Healey administration just announced that for these overflow sites, like the shelter at Melnia Cass, migrants who are staying there are going to need to prove on a monthly basis that they're looking for jobs, looking for housing, and learning English in order to keep their spots. I know you talk a lot with people who are providing services to migrants. What are they saying about these changes and proposed changes?
Yeah, it's a really big change. It would be kind of the first of its kind, since the right to shelter law went into effect in Massachusetts, decades ago. I think that people who provide shelter understand that politicians, lawmakers are kind of in a tough place because it's really expensive to shelter folks and to keep the program running as it is. But at the same time, they worry that 9 months is too short to, get people enough time to get on their feet, to get enrolled in programs, to find housing. Right now, the average stay can be as long as, 14 months or more. And so a lot of folks who provide these services worry that at 9 months, people will exit shelter just to re-enter the program, that it may not really fix the problem that lawmakers are kind of setting out to address.
Alberto, I know you talk a lot with established immigrant communities in the Boston area. How are they reacting to the changes that I just mentioned?
Well, those are natural changes because I think those are the more pragmatic changes that you have to make sure that these folks are being integrated into the society and so forth. But it's interesting because you have to almost differentiate now with those who have recently arrived, who have this status, right, and they're getting all of this humanitarian aid through this parole program, and here in Massachusetts, we're very generous, but there's a layer of immigrants who've been here for many years, really undocumented, but almost same from very similar countries, fleeing almost the exact same situation, but haven't had the benefit of the status where they haven't had all of these benefits. So there's a little bit of a resentment from even immigrants to the newly arrived immigrants.
You're talking about people from what countries, for example? I know a lot of the new arrivals are coming from Haiti.
Haiti, the new arrivals are Haiti, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and one more. But just everybody, Salvadorians, Colombians, Cubans who've been here for many years, even Venezuelans who've been here. Yeah, Venezuela. Venezuela is a big one, right? That's the biggest number, anyways. So yeah, there is this this kind of two levels or two different types of undocumented or people who don't have their progress. And I commend the Healey administration. They're trying to do whatever they can to integrate these folks sooner rather than later. But you've got this whole swath of other immigrants who've been here and say, I don't have my work papers. I've been, contributing, etc.
That's a really interesting dynamic. Samantha, I mentioned at the outset that there's this very unpleasant alleged incident at a migrant shelter in Rockland in which a migrant from Haiti is accused of raping a girl who I believe was 15 years old, also a migrant from Haiti. Governor Healey was asked to weigh in on that alleged rape. She said that the man in question had come to Massachusetts on a federal program. She called the alleged incident terrible and horrible, but she also said, when she was asked if she could keep this sort of thing from happening again, it's unfortunate that from time to time things will happen. And Kelly Ayotte, who's running for governor of New Hampshire, seized on that and basically made it part of her campaign pitch against her opponent, who's been endorsed by Maura Healey. Let's take a listen to how Ayotte framed this when she was talking with radio show host Howie Carr.
I was the Attorney General. I was a former prosecutor. And when you say things like from time to time things happen about rape, especially from people who are not even supposed to be in our country, it's outrageous. And my opponent, Joyce Craig, has been endorsed by Maura Healey. So I asked her, what do you think about her statement? And don't you think you should denounce her endorsement? And Howie, I heard crickets.
Samantha Gross, are you surprised to hear a selected part of Maura Healey's response to this alleged rape folded into a statement by one of the Republican candidates for governor of New Hampshire?
Yeah, I would say it's not surprising. Incidents like this are often politicized. It's happened for years. This is not a new dynamic. I also think that, especially in Massachusetts, where it's kind of seen as this liberal bastion that has these laws, like the right to shelter law that allows people to come and, stay. That gets politicized. It happened, when Ron DeSantis flew many migrants from Texas to Massachusetts and said, you guys have a right to shelter, take that. The situation in Rockland has also really been politicized. The day after, I believe it happened, Donald Trump sent a fundraising email about it. Even our local Mass GOP here had, put out statements about it. I think it's a really horrible thing that happened. I went to Rockland and spoke to some people who live in that hotel. I think it's a really awful thing. But it does seem like, when these things happen, it does get politicized. So it's not surprising to me to see that Kelly Ayotte said that. It's also not surprising to me to see that, Maura Healey is getting a lot of flack for her statement. I think that with a situation like this, it's hard to say the right thing. But yeah, I think that this situation will continue to be politicized, especially, in this cycle.
Alberto, Samantha mentioned Donald Trump. He convinced congressional Republicans not to pass a border deal that he felt could have helped President Biden politically. At the same time, he has continually talked about migrants in incendiary, dehumanizing terms. The quote that stands out for me is his assertion that they are poisoning the blood of the country. And that's something that seems to be resonating with at least a portion of the American electorate. There was a poll that UMass did earlier this year when people were asked if they believe that immigrants are poisoning the blood of the country. 31% of conservatives said they thought they were, 22% of independents, 12% of Democrats. And then when the question was asked in a slightly different way, do you believe a rise in immigrants endangers American culture? 55% of conservatives said yes, 39% of independents, and 22% of Democrats. How dangerous do you think the former president's rhetoric is on this topic?
Well, I think it's dangerous in the sense that the American public is the one that's listening to this. And sometimes, when you go to the actual groups, right, if you ask Latinos, are they offended? And then you see Donald Trump doing better within the Latino community in terms of votership than he did before.
Yeah.
Then you start to realize that sometimes white America gets more offended for the group that they're defending than the actual group.
Oh,
right?
So you don't hear people taking real umbrage?
No, very, very little, because they understand now Donald Trump's kind of strategy, his verbiage, his whole style. And I'm shocked at the amount of Latinos who voted last time for Biden are saying they're voting for Trump this year.
Oh, that's very interesting.
And this is in the bubble of Massachusetts, a very liberal. If I go to down in South Florida, it's even more rabid, the support for Donald Trump within certain Latino groups. So, when he says something like that, I think you got to take it with a grain of salt, because Latinos aren't really listening to that part, or they're not really paying attention to.
That's very, very interesting. Samantha, you're talking with a different population, and you've spent time with the migrants who are here, who the president's talking about. To what extent is the rhetoric that we've just been discussing on their radar? If you go to a place like the shelter in Rockland or any one of these other overflow sites, are they aware that this discourse is out there?
I think they're aware in the way that it filters down through the community. I think that type of rhetoric from Donald Trump, gets people going who maybe aren't immigrants, for example, and they are the ones who, are showing up at, shelter sites, protesting, showing up at, Governor Healey's house, protesting the shelter situation. And I think the folks who are living in these shelters, they see that. And I think they kind of see that maybe other people view them as a threat. But I haven't had conversations with them where they specifically bring up, Donald Trump's comments. But I think, the rhetoric filters down for sure.
Just briefly, we've got about 30 seconds left, but I'd love to hear from each of you. It seems like we are basically in a moment right now where, given the migrant crisis in Massachusetts' role in the national political imagination, it seems like we're going to be under a microscope between now and the election, and maybe even after the election. Is that a fair conclusion to draw here?
Yeah, because things are going to get worse. They're not going to get better. This program is going to run out of money sooner or later. It's costing us $50 to $75 million. Where are we going to get that money to continue? Because as Samantha said, 9 months is not enough. They're not going to be integrated into 9
Samantha,
months. Do
you see the scrutiny continuing? Do you agree?
I do, especially given, the housing crisis and all these compounding issues that make it really hard for people to get on their feet in general right now. The more people who come in, the more, the strain on the system. And as a right to shelter state, Massachusetts is unique in that way and will continue to be used as an example.
Well, I guess we can all buckle up and brace for what is coming next. Samantha Gross, Alberto Vasallo, thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Adam.
Next up, John Santiago was sworn in as Massachusetts Secretary of Veterans Affairs 1 year ago this month. The former state rep, emergency room physician, and Army Reserve Colonel sat down with GBH News' Katie Landon to talk about his first year on the job and what he hopes to accomplish in the year to come.
Secretary, thank you for joining us, for having this conversation as we mark kind of 1 year in this new role for you. What's your first year been like on the job?
Well, it's been a whirlwind. It's been exciting. It's been transformative, but there's still so much more to do. I'm excited about what we've been able to do, but the opportunities moving forward.
Cool. And this is shortly after you were sworn in. You said that one of your goals was to rebuild trust in the veterans community. You talked about it being kind of both a startup and a turnaround. Where are things now in that turnaround? What's the, trust meter that you've seen?
Well, without question, the Executive Office of Veteran Services really came out of a piece of legislation that really elevated this position to a cabinet level, partly because the veteran community had been asking this for a long time, but also because of what had happened during COVID. As you know very well, over 100 veterans died tragically at Holyoke and at Chelsea. And so this was a response to that, and a big part of what had happened there was just a loss of trust in the veteran community, particularly at Holyoke and in Chelsea. And so we sought to address that head on. As a physician who worked during COVID throughout its entirety, I had a firsthand glimpse into it. I met with the staff, the veterans, the families, to talk to them about their experiences and their trauma. And so the first year was really about creating a culture of accountability, of streamlining efforts, of making them more efficient, of making sure that the veterans and the staff know that we in state government have their back.
And there was that, kind of really blistering series of reports faulting the series of decisions made in the Holyoke Soldiers' Home that contributed to the deadly outbreak there. What's changed since then regarding the standards of care, or the protocols around things like infection control?
Well, let me just say that we've sought to standardize and professionalize the entire system, working closely with DPH and a variety of other stakeholders. We have leadership in place with Superintendent Mike Lazo at Holyoke. We just hired Christine Baldini a couple of months ago, 25 years of nursing home experience, really a leader across the state. We've put these two institutions in a better place, and although we can't forget the past, we can shape the future. So really closely working with them to align our efforts to make sure that we are following evidence-based practices and committed to making sure the experience from the staff and from the veteran is exemplary.
And so maybe if you're a veteran living in one of those homes, what's different now versus 4 years ago or before?
Well, there are a variety of regulatory things that are different. As a part of the legislation, these homes had to be licensed, had to go through DPH and CMS licensing. We've done that at Chelsea. We're working on that at Holyoke. But I can tell you that in the homes, but also outside the homes and the programs we offer, it's really been about engagement, really. And that starts with listening. Because to me, whatever career I've had before, if we've tried to be a leader, that's always started with listening. So going to the homes, first weeks into this office, spending time there at Chelsea and Holyoke, listening to the veterans, listening to the staff there, to the superintendents, really putting in a leadership structure that is going to hold themselves accountable, hold me accountable. That's what this is about.
And as we're talking about the leadership at these homes, we did see just this week 2 of the former officials at Holyoke settled their neglect case in a way that's going to allow them to not face any jail time. Do you think that was the right outcome there?
Well, I'm not a judge. I don't practice in the legal profession. All I know is that as a physician, as a secretary there who's committed to supporting our veterans, we're glad that this chapter is closed and that we plan to move forward with this. We're excited that both homes, one of which has been rebuilt and occupied right now in Chelsea, and that we were able to secure funding to build a brand new home at Holyoke. And I think one of the things that we did when we had that groundbreaking in August in Holyoke was to meet with families of those who had lost loved ones. The governor was there, the lieutenant governor was there, Congressman Neal was there to say, listen, we're doing this for you. We're investing this money, improving services, increasing services to honor the families that lost a loved one, but also those that are currently there.
And as you think about those families, are you concerned that as they watch this outcome in the court system, that it's going to contribute to that lack of trust that you've been working to rebuild?
Well, I'm sure that a piece of their heart was lost when their loved one went, and we could never take that away from them and bring them back. But we can shape the future and making sure that they're engaged and that the veterans that are still there and the families that are still involved with Holyoke or still living there, that they are getting the care that they deserve, and that's what we're committed to doing. And I'm excited that with Superintendent Lazo's leadership, with the folks there, that we're doing that right now. And let me just say, COVID will always be with us, right? We have tools, antivirals, personal protective equipment. We have an understanding of it that we are so far away from where we were in 2020. I can remember being in the emergency department as a physician. The first couple of days, folks are scared, concerned, worried, rightly so. I was one of those folks. But we've changed so much in terms of how we practice, how we educate each other, how we prevent this, and we've instituted those things at both homes to make it a safer place. And I'm confident about the work that we're doing there day in, day out to make it a better place, make it a safer place, and to support our veteran community.
You know, and another former role that you've played is as a state lawmaker, and you've had the chance over the past year to testify in support of and speak out in favor of some legislation that Governor Healy has filed, dubbed the HERO Act, a bill that aims to, I believe, kind of modernize and expand veterans' benefits and services. What do you see as the need for a bill like this?
Well, what we did is that we looked at 50 states, 49 other states rather. Where are the gaps in services here in the Commonwealth? What are other states doing? How can we bring those practices here in the Commonwealth? How do we make sure Massachusetts is the leader across the entire country when it comes to veteran services? What I've come to learn over my time here is that foundationally there was some strong programming there, right? But what COVID and the experience at Holyoke and Chelsea taught me was that when the situation at Chelsea and Holyoke resulted in the tragic deaths of 100 plus veterans, that those issues, that lack of accountability, didn't just exist at the homes, that they infiltrated other parts of government as well. So we really had to reinvent how we go about our services and our programs at the Executive Office of Veteran Services. We had to pay just as much attention, be just as diligent when it comes to building program, fostering growth, making sure that folks are engaged. And so that's what the HERO Act is a part of. We saw a variety of gaps that needed to be addressed. We sought to modernize a number of things. We sought to increase benefits, and particularly when it comes to inclusivity, which I care passionately about, and the governor and lieutenant governor are big leaders when it comes to this, making sure that people feel engaged, invited to this. As you know, there are a variety of, women are the fastest growing group in terms of veterans. You have veterans of color who are out there. You have veterans who have been discriminated in the past for gender or sexual orientation. And so we wanted to make sure that those folks are involved and engaged. And we put forth the HERO Act, 17 proposals, and we're excited to see it go through the legislative process. We have full faith in that process with the Senate and the House. Chair Cassidy and Chair Velas, big champions of the veteran community. to support a bill, hopefully to come out before the end of the session.
And I know another thing that has taken a lot of the legislature's attention lately is the situation around shelter capacity and the influx of new immigrants to the state and other homeless families. It was announced this week that the former, do I have this right, the former Chelsea Soldiers Home building will be used as an overflow shelter site for people who are waiting for shelter. Is that going to affect care or operations in Chelsea at all?
The short answer is no, not at all. Operations, the veterans at the home and the veterans at the domiciliary as well. I mean, this situation is a very challenging one, the emergency assistance program that you're referring to. Mm-hmm. This is one that we've had in Massachusetts for decades, right? We're at capacity here. I think the governor has been very sensible in terms of crafting a policy that is both pragmatic but also empathetic to the families that are coming across the country here and from other parts of the world here. And there is a building that is currently vacant, that is scheduled to be demolished over the course of the next year or so. And it is now going to be used to house emergency assistance families, pregnant women, and folks that are overflow sites that are typically you've seen in Roxbury and Cambridge.
So, and as we see this situation continue to unfold in the family shelter system, the Healy administration is also looking to recently launched an initiative aiming at ending veterans homelessness in Massachusetts.
That's right.
What kind of effort is that going to take? That sounds like a pretty big goal.
It is a pretty goal, but Governor Healy and Lieutenant Governor Driscoll think big, and they're visionaries. And from the very beginning of their administration, they have tasked all of us, how can we address housing, the number one crisis we're having in the Commonwealth? Irrespective of where you may live in state government, we operate a Veterans Secretariat. Mm-hmm. Some may ask, what does the Veterans Secretariat have to do with housing? A whole lot. There are homeless veterans across the Commonwealth. And over the course of the past 10 years or so, that number has dwindled down, but they still exist. Mm-hmm. If you look at the data from the annual once-a-year count that we do, there's still about 500 to 600 veterans who are homeless. The majority of them living in transitional housing, so have a roof over their head today, but looking for permanent housing. Now, there are supply issues, as we know, and so Governor Healy tasked all of us, all the secretaries, to really think thoughtfully about this, to work together. So early on in my tenure as secretary, we began to put ideas together alongside Secretary Augustus to come up with a plan to address veterans homelessness. And it's a 5-pillar plan, really focused on direct outreach to veterans, coordinating efforts across state, federal, and local municipalities, right? Investing in some shorter capital needs that are required, but really making sure that folks feel coordinated and engaged, because there are a variety of services, resources that are available right now. But if we better allocate them, better coordinate them across the system, we will get to what's called functional zero. Mm-hmm. And what that means is that homelessness in the veteran community is short, brief, not reoccurring. So that's our goal over the next couple of years.
There's a few cities across the state that are already at that functional zero level,
correct.
Right?
There's a few cities, there's a few states, but so we're almost there. Again, if you look at the annual count, 545, I believe what the number is, and most of those folks live in transitional housing, looking for permanent housing. If you look at the numbers of unsheltered veterans, it's closer to the 30s and 40s. Now, it is very challenging, obviously. As someone who works in a safety net hospital, you're dealing with folks who are challenged with the housing situation, but also mental health and substance use. The same thing could be said for the veteran community as well. And so these are communities that you have to purposely engage with. You have to really validate their concerns, work with them, provide strong case management and wraparound services, and really coordinate services across the state. And we're looking forward to launching that. We launched the campaign a couple weeks ago, but seeing that through over the next couple months, couple years.
You mentioned mental health as well. I know a couple of years ago there was a new mental health law passed in Massachusetts that created a panel to really look at mental health among veterans and service members and ways to guard against suicide in that population. I think there was recently a report filed, or a few months ago. What more does the state need to be doing in this area?
Well, this is something I feel passionate about as a physician, as someone who cares for many patients with mental health and behavioral health concerns. Now, when veterans come back, or soldiers come back from abroad, as a veteran myself, that experience may be shocking. It's transition. You might be entering a new state. You might be dealing with some issues that you've experienced abroad. You're looking for a job, looking for educational opportunities, at the same time trying to understand what it feels like to be outside of the military. And veterans need the support. First of all, they sign their name to a contract to defend their country, right? So the least we can do as a Commonwealth and as a country is support them, right? And so we are looking forward to the next year or so to put forth a plan to better address veteran suicide. Now, those numbers have been slowly creeping up, which is of concern. One of the things that really shocked me and saddened me over the course of this past year were the number of calls that I've received from families, from the DOD, about military-affiliated folks who have passed away, some of which by suicide. That's something that I wasn't expecting to receive at the rate that I'm receiving now. And so it's really hit me at a personal and a professional level. And so we want to get active on that. So we've activated a team across state government, because there are a variety of different folks in state government operating in this space of suicide and mental health, behavioral health, substance use, focused on veterans. So we've put them together, created a working group, and over the course of the next couple of months, we plan to put forward a plan in conjunction with other stakeholders to really address this, take this head on. The first step was the report that you referred to. That was a report that our team worked alongside a variety of stakeholders to put together early on in the administration. We have the recommendations, a lot of it focused on how do we support peer support services, informal across state. What do we do about lethal means? I mean, if you look at the characteristics associated with veteran suicide, it's often done via lethal means. It's often associated with substance use and mental health issues. So we have a lot to work to do on that, but every veteran is a life worth saving, and we're looking forward to getting folks in a room over the next couple of months and coming out with a plan.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing that plan. Secretary, thank you so much for walking through it with me, and we'll be watching to see what happens in year 2 of the Secretariat.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's it for tonight, but do come back next week. And in the meantime, let us know what you think. The email is talkingpolitics@wgbh.org, and the website is gbhnews.org/talkingpolitics. Thanks for watching, and good night.